This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter, batch churned from single origin cream.
We've got a culturing process, a fermenting process, an aging process. So the butter will taste very different than, I guess, the average supermarket butter. I like to say we make butter makers butter. Like, this is the sort of butter makers would like to eat, simply because of the slow process in which we ferment and age and get the flavour into it. You know, the natural fermentation that gets all the flavours into the cream, and then once you churn it, you end up with this really rich, flavoursome butter that evolves and changes because it's a live culture that's in the butter as well.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
The restaurant's bigger than me. Every day that you look at that dining room, somebody's celebrating a birthday, an anniversary. But the fact that I can facilitate a moment in people's lives is the reason that I cook.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Chefs are renowned for travelling the globe and immersing themselves in the kitchens and cultures abroad to enhance their skills. But what impact does living in another country have on one's value and importance of food while growing up, even before they've begun their journey in hospitality? Jack Brown is the head chef at Printhie Wines in Orange. Jack, how are you?
I'm excellent. How are you?
That's good to hear. I love to hear someone who is excellent. You're in Orange, which is an amazing region of New South Wales. What's things like there at the moment?
At the moment, things are fantastic. It's getting a bit colder. The autumn colours are definitely coming through as the vintage settles down for the rest of the wineries. The region will sort of start to relax a little bit. Heading into this time of year, it's the end of vintage for a lot of the wineries. So a lot of the grapes have been picked. It's autumn and it's getting a bit cold. Orange is a really cool climate. Currently, I'm sitting at about 1,000 metres above sea level.
Tell us a little bit about Printhie Wines and sort of your role within the restaurant and the winery.
Printhie Wines is quite a young winery. It's been around since about 1996. The restaurant is only 18 months old. It's a completely fresh canvas, and the property that the restaurant's on is on about 80 hectares of apple orchards on the base of Mount Canobolas, which I'm told is the highest peak all the way to South Africa, apparently. Yeah, so it's sort of like the base of the snowy mountains, and it's a bit frosty up here. It's good.
You mentioned that it's 18 months old. Tell us a bit about what you're doing in the restaurant, and have you been involved since the beginning?
I've been involved since the beginning. I actually was the sous chef at the Barrow Waters Inn before I came out here, and COVID was really the sort of draw card that made me rethink my life. To make the break of the cycle of the craziness of the Barrow Waters Inn. It made me wanting more, and it made me think that there could be an impact that I could be doing with the food. My background as a First Nation Australian, I spend a lot of time sort of with native ingredients and connecting food and people and nature with my story, which is it's actually quite an interesting one, because I've only really discovered a lot about my story just recently. What I mean by that is I didn't know who my biological father was until about maybe 12 months ago. And it turns out that I've got 4 brothers who have been looking for me for about 30 years.
Wow. Tell us a bit more about this, and what sort of impact has this revelation had on you?
Oh, it's had the biggest impact, really. It was kind of like a lot to stomach when I first found out about it. My father was, a victim of the stolen generation, and he was taken from his family at a really young age. So a lot of the history on that side of the fence that I've been searching for has deliberately been lost. The more that I dig into it, the more the more that it sort of shows in my food. Every aspect of the degustation I do at Printhie has got a lot of native elements into it, and a lot of flavor profiles that you won't see at other restaurants.
Well, as someone that's a First Nation Australian, let's talk about native ingredients. They've become incredibly popular over the last decade on menus, and there's been chefs that have worked with First Nation people to understand them better. But from your perspective, where do you see it, and how do you utilise that in a restaurant menu?
Well, I think it's a touchy subject, and you're right. It has had a huge sort of, I don't know, how do you say it? I wouldn't say it's a trend, because it's like it essentially is a part of my life. So I hate the word trend. But you're right. It's definitely become a lot more popular these days in everybody's menu. And I think that the produce we have in Australia is so unique. It's so different to everywhere else in the world. It's such a privilege in my position to be able to deliver the story and to deliver the narrative with the cooking. Like, for example, I'm doing a fermented Banksia that I turn into vinegar. That's got a really sort of natural sweetness from the actual nectar of a Banksia, and I'm making it the same as an apple cider vinegar to match it with, Sydney rock oysters. And it's an ongoing journey, because climate to climate, Australia is, it's so unique when it comes to different climates. Where I am in Nashdale, in the Orange region, I live in a place called Nashdale, which is about 15 minutes out of the town, and the seasons will sort of be a little bit sort of behind the rest of Australia, because it is cooler up here. But as soon as you head down the mountain and go another, 15 minutes north, it's a different climate and there's different produce there. I'm kind of really, I don't want to, I live on a property that's got, 80 hectares. I'm not interested in planting, aubergines and courgettes. I'm filling the place with native ice plant, with warrigal greens, with Geraldton wax, with different kind of myrtles. It's my native garden is probably, I don't know. It's a personal thing for me, where I get a lot of I get a lot of pleasure in being connected to the plant itself, being connected to the produce itself. And the one thing that you'll find out here is that, like, I am so close to, producers, winemakers, other chefs. It's a melting pot of it's a gourmet region.
Yeah, it's fascinating what you're doing there. I want to explore native ingredients a little bit more, and what's important when you're sourcing native ingredients and the connections that you make, to utilize them the way that you do. Do you have any sort of stories of the connections that you've made and how it works?
Well, for example, there's a large community of First Nation Australian out in the Central West. One man in particular, his name's Gerald, and he actually has a native garden within the town that everybody can go visit whenever they like, and to have the education of what these things actually taste like as their sole ingredient is actually really special. And so for me, being outside, I can't be in the city. Like, Surrey Hills is a beautiful part, but you're not going to be inspired there. Well, for me, anyways, this is. But we have all of this bush tracks. We have wild wallabies, wombats, sugar gliders, all of these amazing wildlife you'll see around, like, just in my backyard. It's actually incredible. For an example, I have the Canobbla State Forest just behind my house. At the moment, we have like an abundance of different kinds of mushrooms and things like that coming through the grounds. Me and my chefs were walking through, and we found all these different kinds of nettles, all these different kinds of bush mints and river mints. And we actually came up with a dish just by being outside together. We didn't actually cook anything outside, but we had our notebooks and we wrote down every little thing. By the time we had come back to the restaurant, our minds were already full of like different ideas that we could do with produce. The one place that really made me shine was probably working at the Waters Inn, where I felt like it was a little bit of a lost soul at the time. I kind of didn't know where, I fit in the world of cooking. And the world of cooking is such a large spectrum. To actually find your style, you don't find that for many years after you've qualified as a chef and after you've done some hard yards working under somebody else. But working with Brian Richard Geraghty on the Hawkesbury River was probably the most connected that I'd ever felt to people, to produce, and then to the customers. Because once you have all of those things in your life, you tend to cook 10 times better.
We don't hear a lot about Brian Geraghty, but tell us about sort of his influence on you.
Brian Richard Geraghty changed my life. He was seriously the one who made me realize that nothing was impossible and everything was possible. From every morning, we would have to pick up the boat at the Hawkesbury River together as a team, 6 o'clock in the morning, trying to fight our way through the mist, navigate ourselves through all different boats that had sunken through floods and all sorts of stuff. If you were going to work at the Waters Inn, you really had to do everything there, from cleaning out humongous goannas that you'd find underneath your section to, making sandbags out of tea towels to stop the restaurant from flooding. During the COVID period, there was no takeaways or there was no other way that we could pivot as a restaurant like everybody else in Sydney was. A lot of people were sort of doing dine-in at home meals, sort of takeaway stuff from the restaurant. Because we were, halfway down the Hawkesbury River in Barara, that wasn't an option for us. So together as chefs, we repainted the restaurant. We made a bar on the middle of the old deck, and we tiled it, and we created this thing where you felt so emotionally connected to this building that when it came to cooking in that place, you really that was the cherry on top. You're like, I've done everything in the building. Now let's cook. It was actually such a mind-blowing experience, and I wouldn't have the things in my life now if it wasn't for that man, Brian Richard Geraghty.
Wow, that's extraordinary. Well, I want to explore sort of your food and what you are doing in more detail in a little bit at Printhie Wines, but take us back to when you were young. What sort of role did food play for you growing up?
Food was everything to me when I was growing up, and I actually didn't realise the impact it had on my life until I started actually cooking. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't be a chef if it wasn't for the journey of food I had prior. I was lucky. I had a mum and I had a dad who both loved cooking, and I always had really nice meals at home. But come 2000, the year the Olympics were on in Sydney, my father came to us as a whole family and said, listen, we're going to move to Singapore. I had no idea what Singapore was back then. I had no idea about anything to do with Singapore. I had this idea in my head of what it was going to be like, and it was completely different once I lived it. Singapore is probably one of the biggest melting pots of cultures when it comes to food, and probably one of those countries that takes food way more seriously than other countries. I used to take the time out of my day to WAG school just so I could go and get some char siu pork and have a couple of Tiger beers.
Amazing.
But when you came into Singapore and you had things like chicken rice, roti canai, the chili and pepper crabs, the char siu pork, the char kway teow, like from Chinese to Indian to Malaysian to Western, was such an amazing experience. And I have no regrets. I literally ate everything I possibly could. Anything that was put in front of me, I had it.
Did that sort of light a fire within you to sort of go down the path as a chef?
Absolutely. And I think for me, I was always born as a creative. I grew up playing electric guitar since I was 8 years old. I was always painting. I was always drawing. I was always outside capturing lizards and keeping them in my house for my mum to find. It was always a, it was always a, it was always an interest of mine to be outside of the house and to be experiencing stuff. And the one thing that you will experience when it comes to food is human connection, and you'll be surprised the people that you will come across just sitting there and having a meal.
Tell us a bit about how you started your career. Do you have any stories of what it was like for you early on as you sort of started your career as a chef?
I was super lucky I was super lucky as a young chef. I really had the right people in my life to, take an interest in me. And I think it was because I was always so passionate and interested in everything that was going on in the restaurant that people really, people really took that and it really nurtured that. One man in particular was probably when I started my apprenticeship. His name was James Patrick Nicholas, and he was a sous chef of a restaurant called the Pet a Terre in London. But he was the original starting team with Richard Neat back in 1994. And this man saw how eager I was to learn. He nurtured me through the first 3 years of my apprenticeship, and then told me, "Jack, you need to pack up your things and you need to go." He realized that there was only so much that he could teach me, and there was only so far I could go within the company that I was working at. And he strongly advised me. He was like, "Jack, you're obsessed with that restaurant. Why don't you go work over there?" And so I jumped onto a bunch of hatted restaurants in Sydney, and I worked with some really good people. And I literally just spent my years just hard labor, just learning as much as I could.
Was there anyone that sort of stood out along that journey amongst the hatted restaurants in Sydney that sort of was an influence on you?
Absolutely. I would say that for me, even just going to people's restaurants and experience it, that could be one thing. But also when you work side by someone who you are seriously inspired by, it gives you a lot of drive, and it gives you a lot of confidence in that you can do this with your life too. The one person who really changed my life, again, was probably Jackie Challoner at Nomad. And just watching this lady on every section, watching her break down a pig on my first day, I was just like, "Oh my God, this lady's amazing." But, and again, like that restaurant was a restaurant where, there were 6 people on garde, there were 2 people on every section. The restaurant seats 150 people in the heart of Surrey Hills. It was an exciting place. It was crazy. Your biros would melt out of your pockets, standing by the fire.
You mentioned at the top of the show about being at Barara Waters during COVID, and then sort of wanting something new and wanting a new challenge, and the opportunity in Orange presented itself. But what was that move like for you, and moving to Orange? Did it have its challenges?
Absolutely. The thing about Orange and Nashdale is it has the same challenges as what the Barara Waters Inn had, and so I feel like I was actually kind of prepared for it in the training that I had previously, but also. This was a town that I just wanted people to, I wanted to be accepted in. I knew it wasn't going to be, I just moved here and I was like, "Oh, hey guys, I'm here." I actually needed a lot of support and a lot of help from the town, and that was probably the one thing that was really really took me back. Was there's a really strong community of chefs here. That they would, as soon as they heard that I was in town, they would all reach out to me and say, "Hey, Jack, is there anything you need? I can help with suppliers. I can help you with this. I can connect you with the right person to, if you need to have your ovens fixed, or all of the stuff that you need to relearn when you come out to a place like this." And so, I think that the one thing that really helped me a lot was just, again, like, having the support of other people that had already done the journey before.
You mentioned the native food garden that you have at the moment. What are the challenges with growing native ingredients that you found so far?
Well, the challenges I have with the native ingredients in out here is like at the moment, like every morning, the place is covered in frost, and so I had to choose different plants that could be hardy to frost and drought. But we have two different climates at two different locations. Where the winery at Wolong is a completely different, warmer climate to the winery we have up at Printhie, which is in Nashdale. So every morning, my house is I don't know, probably about -1 degrees at the moment.
Wow.
And so my Geraldton wax plant from Western Australia, he's not doing too well out here. but the Geraldton wax that I have down in Molong, they're happy, and they're coming along really well. I'm going to create a glass house and just, see what I can do with that. It's all coming with trial and error. I don't really have the answers to, what grows right in certain places. I wish I did, but I just replicate the environment as best I can. If it's going to be putting it inside, if it's going to be keeping it outside during the small hot months that we do have around here, but we make it work.
Tell me a little bit about sort of creating a menu as well. You're part of a winery. You've got the native ingredients as well. But is there benefits to being part of the winery, or are there constraints in sort of having to sort of match to wines when you're creating dishes?
There is definitely. Well, I was so lucky about coming out here because the Swift family just let me run with it. They said, Jack, your skill is cooking, our skill is making wine, so you cook. There was no like preconception. There was no sort of, we need this on the menu. I needed to take the Swifts on a journey to be able to show them, what we were going to do. And I think like their idea of a restaurant and my idea of a restaurant on the early days was different. But we went on the journey together, and we've come up with a product that everybody is really happy with. For me, I constantly need to be inspired. I constantly need to be changing things up, and the menu is almost different almost every week. But again, that's something that sort of keeps me on my feet, that keeps the chefs that work under me, keeps them learning. There's never a week that goes past with an identical menu.
That's amazing. Is there a dish or two that you can share with us that kind of exemplifies what you are doing there?
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, I think my fish course at the moment served with we do a single vintage of Wattleview Chardonnay, which Wattleview is the vineyard behind Printhie, which is where we get our grapes from that I used to live at. And the Wattleview Chardonnay is buttery, it's oaky, it's lovely. And so I'm matching it with a Murray cod, pan roasted Murray cod. I've made a Sabayon out of lemon myrtle, different kind of coastal greens. The apples that I have on the orchard, I've done a little brunoise of apples, and I fold them through a little sort of ragu of coastal greens, turnips, and salmon caviar, with a really lovely light foam of lemon myrtle and a Geraldton wax oil.
What are the challenges with balancing these native ingredients? Because some of them are quite astringent and quite extreme flavours, and some of them quite delicate. But how do you balance that?
I balance it by singling them out and individual attention. I feel like if you actually pay individual attention to every single element of your dish, then the dish is going to be great. But you're right. The native ingredients can either be extremely harsh or very subtle, and easily overpowered or overpowering, and so you really need to find. For example, lemon myrtle can be very overpowering, and so for my fish course that I've just decided to do, is the sauce is all foamed, and so there's a light aeration through the whole sauce, and so you get the lemon myrtle will pop up in all sorts of different air pockets of your mouth, but then again the fish is still very clean and pure, that it really sits through the dish really nicely.
You mentioned a little bit earlier about the revelation about your biological father. What sort of impact has that had on your approach to food and cooking? Has it changed it quite dramatically since you've had this revelation?
Absolutely. It actually kind of, it almost gave me what I felt, all of this time, because I didn't know my background, and I didn't know that I didn't know like the roots of where my family came from. I felt like I didn't have the right as a chef to use these ingredients, and so I think now that I found out the exact location of where my family comes from, and it's the top point of Queensland. I've found out that my father was actually an Aboriginal activist when it comes to music, and he played with bands like Goanna. He played with bands like yeah, absolutely. He played
Amazing.
I've found all of the stuff over YouTube and things like that. It's incredible, and I've never actually saw a photograph or his face until about 12 months ago.
The chefs and the industry is so much media focus, and chefs often have this sense of identity that they need to hold to the media. But for you, there's that element. But this revelation that you have as well about your biological father and your background, has that had an impact on your sense of identity as well?
It has. I never identified as a First Nation Australian until this. I always knew that I had Aboriginal blood, but I never knew that I was half Aboriginal. I never knew I never knew how deep those roots went, and it actually doesn't matter. That's the thing, is because I just recently got connected to my father's sister, because my father actually, I didn't tell you this part, but he's actually not alive anymore. He died in a car accident in 2000 and 2001. So I never actually got to meet him. I never got to connect with him. The one thing I did find was I actually had 4 other brothers that I never knew, who have been looking for me, and we look identical to each other. It's crazy. But I think that, like, I think for me, myself, now these days, I identify as a First Nation Australian, and that is something that is a big game changer for me in my life, because I never knew that, but I always felt different, and I always felt a lot of things were actually answered for me. And on a spiritual level, it's very strange and very difficult for me to explain, but I believe that I've met my father before in my dreams, and it sounds crazy, but I feel like that he's spoken to me recently. I feel like that this spiritual journey that I've gone through with finding out who myself is has really, really changed my whole life, and changed my identity as a human, not even just as a chef. I have so much respect for everybody who tells that story, and everybody who uses First Nation ingredients. But I really would love First Nation Australians who are cooking in other people's restaurants to be celebrated and to be acknowledged, because I think that the food should come from them.
Well, Jack, you've got an extraordinary story and doing amazing things out there in Orange. What do you love about what you do?
I think what I love about what I do is the restaurant's bigger than me. They're like, every day that you look at that dining room, somebody's celebrating a birthday, an anniversary, even sad, like some sad stories just recently that really, really shook me up was I had a man come in with his family who's been given 2 years to live, and he's about the same age as me. But he came to my restaurant to have a really beautiful moment with his family, and he asked me to come to the table, and he wanted to share that with me. And it shook me up a little bit, and I was because he was there with his children, and it was really, really heartbreaking for me to hear the story. But the fact that I can facilitate a moment in people's lives is the reason that I cook. In our lives, we're going to be dead in the ground for a long time after we live. We only get these moments. We're only going to be on this earth for a short period of time when you actually think about it.
Well, Jack, it's an absolute honour to hear just a part of your story, and I'm sure we're going to hear much more of it. So please keep in touch, and we'll have to catch up again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep, Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.